Welcome to the Be a Boss Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Beatriz Rivera, entrepreneur and business coach and creator of Be a Boss Coaching, a one-on-one coaching program for folks looking to create a business while learning to embrace their inner boss. On today's podcast, I have David Caicedo, a Brooklyn born and raised organizer and former co executive director at Florida Student Power Network, a nonprofit youth centered organization utilizing political education and organizing strategy to tackle social issues and work toward implementing change in the state of Florida. David is not just a seasoned leader with incredible experience, but a former colleague who canvassed with me during our tenant support work in New York City, and best of all, a dear friend. We reminisce about our tenant support work canvassing days, what it takes to run a truly impactful nonprofit organization, and how to make time for rest, healing, and care within organizations and the people working for them. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, David. I am so excited for you to be on this podcast. I have been wanting to talk to you about your experience and your journey. But before I move forward with just talking about who you are and how awesome you are, if you can introduce yourself and a little bit about who you are.
Hey, yeah, David Caicedo, he, him, él, ellos pronouns. And I am an organizer living in Orlando, Florida, originally from Brooklyn, New York, to Afro Colombian immigrants that came here in the 1980s with my three older siblings.
See, I didn't even know that.
What-
I'm really
what's
excited to learn more about you. I feel like you told me this and
It's been years. It's been
it's been
years. It's been
years.
years.
And just for our
I was
listeners,
like Salvadorian, Ecuadorian, Honduran,
yeah, I mean, just for
Central.
our listeners and people listening. So me and David are really good friends. I will say I consider you a really good friend of mine, even though, in person we see each other once every 2 through I think once every 3, 4 years. But every time I speak with you, I feel like no time has passed. Like we can just pick up wherever we left off last time and we just catch up.
I
Or,
agree.
Awesome. So Afro-Colombian parents, originally from Brooklyn, now living in Florida, and me and David, and I wanna have you talk about this experience with working for the city. So me and David met through our work with the mayor's office in New York City. There was a new initiative called was it originally called TSU or
The way that I explain it is like we were a unit within a unit within the City Hall of New York. It was the tenant support unit within the public engagement unit.
Right. See, I
So
just remember TSU. I didn't even remember what TSU stood for.
there's that whole other team also that we shared a floor with that were like our
Counterparts?
counterparts.
Yeah, I remember. So, we did some work together, we canvassed together, and we were working with this new initiative, trying to get people to learn about us, and I will say that working with that team or during that time, I actually really enjoyed that work. It was, really good, and we met some really cool people, but my experience from it is that it turned into real shit show real fast. Um,
Yeah.
but and we had to get out, but the work itself, just like the canvassing and working for tenants and tenant rights and working with the attorneys, that was really cool. I wish the culture of it wouldn't have turned sour, I wanna say. But, yeah, so that's how me and David know each other, and so every time we talk, we reminisce about that time, and we always talk about the things that are important to us. So the reason why I'm still in touch with David is because he's a badass person. So not only was he a colleague and someone who has similar values, but also my friend. So thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you. That's so funny, the description of TSU and that time. Yeah, I have very warm memories of you. I feel like we always joke around, hang out, and we were part of the same group friend at work, cliques form.
Yes, yes.
We were part of that. I always think about the days in Ernesto and Ruben's apartment.
Oh my gosh, Casa Chicana.
La Chicana. Uh, is it still on Yelp?
I don't know. I think it was on Yelp,
But
yeah, and then somebody remember someone left a review and was like, "This place, it doesn't even exist."
I remember leaving, like, 2 reviews after that, like, "What do you mean?" And, like, pictures of the food and all of that. That's so
Yeah.
funny. But what do I remember about TSU and my experience at TSU? You know, I'm less judgmental about it now,
Yeah.
uh, and less bitter about it now, but I think it was cool to learn the way that a city functions. I remember getting a training on, like, the rats of the city, like, the rat guy for the city was like, "Oh, yeah, they just burrow holes,
Ye
right in front of City Hall," and I'm like, "Dang, like,
Yeah.
what?" Or, like, learning they were called, like, Scandinavian rats or something like that.
Right.
Do you remember
No,
that?
I don't remember that.
It was something I'm pretty sure they said that they were, like, Scandinavian rats that came on, like, the boats or something like that from Europe.
That's funny. No, I just remember also there was just so much random initiatives that we would be a part of. Remember the initiative where there was no Legionnaire?
Legionnaires.
Yeah. There was, like, a random was it I don't even know what it's called. I remember it
It's
was
crazy.
Legionnaires.
We had to, like, ask people we were canvassing in the Bronx, I remember, and, like, either handing out flyers or it was like, "Do you have a air system on your
Mhm.
roof? Because if so, you might have Legionnaires."
Yes. And I remember we didn't even know what that was. What is Legionnaires? And some people were like a millionaire's disease, like, what? And just, like, making fun of it, and it was so random.
But that part of the cool thing was we got to go to, like, the emergency operating center for, like, the whole city of New York.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like, things like that were really cool, or, like, when the Pope was in town, we were the people
Oh, yes, I remember when the Pope came to town, and we were
who loved the Pope. That was a lot of a lot of
it's so
people.
much fun. We were there what were we doing? We were, like, controlling the the
The
the crowd.
traffic. I was right at the entrance of Central Park, somewhere, like, in the Upper West Side, I remember that.
Yes.
And the people, just so many people that were like, "Come on, we just let us into the park."
Yeah. No, I remember that, and I remember taking a picture trying to take a picture of the Pope and trying to send it to my mom, like, "Mom, the Pope is here." She was like, "What?" Um, but yeah, that was so random, but it was really fun. I think that's why I enjoyed that position, that role, because there was so many different things we were doing, and also our work schedule was, like, different. We would start at, like, 11 and end at what, like, 8?
Oh, yeah. You see, those kinda details I forget sometimes. Also, I think it was for folks like us that were thinking beyond individually, had access to staff the Pope or go to the Macy's parade or none of those, or being with the mayor all the
Oh,
time,
yes.
right? Always with him. Like, he was at the train station, we were at the train station. We were at the town halls, we were at the town halls with him. But that's when you start seeing like, oh, but systemically, are we really impacting?
Mhm.
Right? I think it was a piece of there's so many tenants in need in New York City, but we couldn't do what we needed to help them. I feel like out of the 600, 500, whatever cases that we had, like, I maybe only helped a handful of
Yeah,
folks, in, like, in a real substantial
yeah,
way, and tangible way, and that part was like, "Oh, okay, I'm grateful to have learned in this opportunity
yeah,
and to see people," but then this is just something about it is not enough.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure I think after that it grew and they received a lot more resources. So, I wasn't able to see the impact of it as it grew, as there was more like time with it, as it started developing. But I did I think it solidified for me just my own just where I enjoyed helping and how I enjoyed working and talking with people, because I did come across tenants that had real issues, and connecting them to our legal services like that. There was a few cases where would actually get their issues resolved, so that was really cool to see.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. There were or just the relationship building, because 'cause you're talking to these people, you meet them once, then you're following up, calling with them, following up. I've spoke to maybe most of my tenants, like, 10
Yeah,
times,
I know, I
you know?
remember.
Yeah.
So, that was cool. But, okay, so the reason, and I know we're gonna get to this because in my eyes, you are someone with a lot of knowledge and information around nonprofit and nonprofit work, and I've seen you do and lead some great work in that area. And as a social worker myself, I went to school learning about nonprofits, and my focus of area in social work school was mostly how to create a board, management of boards and nonprofit work, program and program evaluation. And I think at some point I thought about, would I want to be an executive director? And I that was sort of the focus for me in when I was in social work school. But I think there's a lot of social workers who, and not just social workers, but people who have values in service and community. There's this gap of, or maybe would want to know more information around nonprofits. But before we get to that, I'm just interested and curious in how you came to grow and embrace the values that you have around service, because I know that, like, since TSU, like, that was a very community service role and job, and since then you've gone on to other work where it's about community and organizing. But I'm curious how you came to those values of service and community in general. Like, what did you do prior to TSU and what led you to that work?
Mm. Grown up poor, girl.
Great. Hey, growing up poor.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think that so I was raised in Brownsville, the border of, like, Brownsville, Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and just think that throughout life, I had so many different kinds of experiences that have led me to this point now. And I think that the values that I hold, like we all deserve healthcare, like rent should be free,
Yeah.
right? I know it's like a hard thing to think about, but like rent should be free. We all deserve dignity. We all deserve quality education. And to me, I think that those things come from seeing the communities that produce me and seeing like the inequalities, seeing being part of an under-resourced
Mm,
community and being part of an oppressed people, right? I think about why did my parents have to come from Colombia to the United States? And I think that these values get solidified more and more as I learn about the systems of oppression more and more. I think when we were at TSU, I found it weird that we were in the community that I actually lived in and still weren't able to address, like the problems that we were facing. But as I start learning about like, okay, the developers, the real estate board of New York, and like the millions of dollars that they throw into our political systems every year, it's like, damn, that's messed up. As we think about just the system as an immigrant, like the immigration system in the United States and how xenophobic and racist it is, it made me want to come into action. When I think about the harms that in the name of capitalism, right? From the enslavement of my ancestors to multinational corporations exploiting my family and my ancestors in Colombia to orchestrated coups. There's just so many reasons I believe that kind of pushed me to believe what I believe now, which is we need a radical reimagining, right? We need like a complete shift in the way that oppressed people are treated, and I think that even around the world, there needs to, especially around the world, right? I think here in the US context, we think about it, but when we think of globally, it's like, yeah, the same things that they're doing here are happening tenfold around the world. Like right now in Palestine, what's going on. And it's like, yeah, there's Gaza literally was a city that had a wall around it that whenever the Israeli government feels like, yeah, we're going to bomb them, boop, 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 like, yeah, stay the fuck in this little confined space, and I feel that resonates with me in the way that police treated folks in my community, the way that folks also feel hopeless, in the communities that I grew up in or communities that I just see. And they almost usually, black, brown, poor, poor white, and I think that I just believe deeply that one day we will see those changes, right? It's like, why is there a hood in every city? It's like,
yeah.
what systems are profiting from Geo Group, private prison corporation, to the police unions that in the way that they're used as a tool of like capitalism, to white supremacy in the way that it shows up, even in the workplace, and I believe that we experienced a lot of that when we were working together. I'm at a point and keep moving more at a point of, okay, like, what do we do to really support people in communities?
I mean, that's why you're my friend, obviously. Because we can talk about these really deep, serious issues. I think how you talked about the idea of growing up poor, right? And in the hood. And to me, I remember thinking, like, when you said, why is there a hood in every city? And I'm like, oh, damn, like I grew up in South Central and you know how on every inner city that's labeled as, like hood or whatever, there's always like a King Boulevard or Martin Luther
Yeah,
King Jr.
it's part of the drink.
I live literally down the street from King, and I was like, "Oh my god." I mean, for me growing up, it's just that's just my home, that's my neighborhood, but then when you start learning about it, really start to see where you grew up and how you grew up. It actually visually you start to see, like, the ways in which neighborhoods and people and communities are.
Stratified into these spaces,
And
yeah.
they're like there's, like, freeways ripping through them, like, I live literally next to the 110 freeway. That's where I grew up, next to the 110, and it's a huge freeway that connects all the major freeways in LA, so I live right smack. I was like, "Oh my god, that's so true." There's liquor stores everywhere, King is down the street, I live next to the 110 freeway, like, that is my hood, like, there's a church right there, there's church, so yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah, with the highways cutting through cities, when you start learning about, like, under the what's the 3rd Avenue Bridge? That used to be a thriving, like, community here in Orlando. The I-4 and 408, like a series of, expressways intersect right over what used to be a Black community, and it's just like, isn't it weird? Like, they only cut through they only cut through communities when they're Black or brown or poor, like,
Yeah, and they're
it's kinda
used
weird.
also as dividers too between,
Exactly.
poor communities, and like you see it in New York. Like I thought about it when I was at Mount Sinai, when I used to work at Mount Sinai in East Harlem, and how we
Mhm.
were on.
That's the one, like, on Park
Right,
Avenue?
it was like Park, and then there was, I think, was it Lexington? I can't even remember anymore. But on one side, on Park, it's the Central Park side, and then literally 1 block over, you see the projects,
Mhm.
and we're right in the middle, and there's these $1,000,000 apartments, right, on the Central Park side, and then there's, like, NYCHA on the other. So and I would go visit some of my patients in those NYCHA apartments all the time.
And sometimes it feels like the police is only there,
Only on that side.
like, with those bright luminescent lights just facing towards people's windows, all in the name of safety, but
Quote,
whose
unquote,
safety?
"safety," right? But now that you've explained sort of why you've come to this work and coming to the different types of roles that you've had. So after TSU, I remember that's when you went to Florida Student Power. Florida
Yes.
Student Power, okay. And this is where I'm really interested because I know that it became larger than what you didn't know it was gonna become so large. So can you tell me how you came to that and how it unfolded as you worked with that team?
Yeah, I was in New York, still at TSU when Trump became the candidate for the Republicans. And my background up to that point had been either working like in government or like electoral. So I was like, dang, I should probably go work on a campaign. And I started asking folks around that I knew were connected to different kinds of campaigns. And that's when someone was like, oh, in Florida, there's an opportunity for you to build out a vote program where young people vote based on their values rather than focusing on a particular candidate. And that really appealed to me because I was registered to vote under the Working Families Party line in New York, so I was just like, okay, this sounds interesting. And at first, I was also kinda like youth organizing. I'm like 29 at the time. I was like, "Dude, what do I have?" And then the person said to me, "Well, there always has to be an older person helping to guide." Like with SNCC, Ella Baker. was there, and that's what I was like, Ella Baker, like, damn, okay, like, yeah, you're right. And that's that's kinda what sold me to move to Florida. And throughout the time there, it went from this vote program with students. I met students in Pensacola, Panama City, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, Gainesville. I don't know if Florida folks know these places. It's probably relevant to them. But essentially, if Florida is this shape from Pensacola to the Keys, um, beneath Miami, there were just young people that really also cared, that also cared deeply about their communities, the schools that they were in, the state of the political nature. And that was the start of it. Just a lot. It was me, a single staff person with a bunch of fellows, and young students all across the country that just wanted to get involved in the elections in one way or another, for many reasons, right? There were students that were completely undocumented. There were students that had DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. There were students that had TPS. There were students that were impacted by the school to prison pipeline. There were students that were houseless. Like, there were students, there was just so much, there's such like a diversity in the reasons why folks were getting involved that was very beautiful to see. And then where the project becomes, starts to take shape into like a longer sustainable nonprofit was at the end of the year in 2016. Young people were like, all right, what are we going to do now? Instead of giving up or losing hope, there were so many young people and partners that we had built relationships that were really like, we need to continue to build out this youth program, and this project into something long term. And really, that's when we started focusing on different strategic issue based campaigns and then strategic electoral campaigns all across Florida.
Nice. Oh my gosh. And so the development of it, what I like is that it became this urgent need to continue the work. And this is why I love the work that you do with young people because, people our age, we've seen the work that it takes. And I think at some point, sometimes you need that vigoration from younger people or anyone who has the energy to continue doing that very necessary work.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been a journey. There have been like a lot of iterations of the organization. I think that with time, a big realization was structure is needed. In the beginning, it was like, all right, you want to do a campaign on your campus against like polystyrene? Okay.
Mhm.
You know, um, your school said they got rid of plastic products, but it was really only for like a short period of time to wait for these students to graduate. And you want to bring back the ban on plastics? Okay.
Mm.
All are a student group that's focused on like migrant students. Okay. Like, and it was really like a loosely connected network where young folks were just communicating with one another. And as time grew, there was really a need for us to connect with the larger organizing community and larger community and to be more strategic. I think that as time went by, we started seeing white supremacists, Nazis, recruiting on college campuses, showing up to college campuses. We saw like the Muslim bans that deeply impacted so many youth. We saw just so many attacks, on like the queer and trans communities, right? LGBTQ plus communities, so many attacks. And it came both from some like the Muslim ban on the federal level to like the protest bans or the attacks on um so many attacks on women's bodies, right? And like bodily autonomy, so many attacks on Black communities, right? I think most recently, the way that in educational materials now in Florida because of a law passed by the Satan was the word ethnicity is now color in educational materials. The word gender is now sex in educational materials. And all of that is a response of a system that needs to maintain control in a changing world. Like their last, most vicious attacks to suppress people's expressions, people's identities, people's voices. So all of those external needs really made us to focus internally of like what do we need to actually be effective and to be in alignment with those impacted, right? And I think to make our campaigns more strategic. So that's where I started, bringing on more staff. We started really developing a more formal relationship with our fiscal sponsor organization of like to get the support that we needed, all for the sake of building something greater,
Mhm.
right? Building something that can actually respond to the moment that we're living in.
Yeah. I really love the whole thing around response and like responding to what's happening because I feel like a lot of like nonprofits in general, just from my experience and what I've seen from nonprofit work, is that they forget that there's a mission, but that mission is forgotten, I feel. And so
Mm,
with nonprofits, sometimes like they've been in existence for so long, perhaps, and so they like forget why they started in the first place or like who they're really serving and the mission. But in this case, like it unfolded as things were happening, as there were these, like you mentioned, different attacks, and it grew. And I'm wondering like how did you grapple with the idea of like, okay, we're organizing, we're responding to what's happening in right now in this like time of our lives, and we're organizing, but as you're getting bigger, you need more structure and more, like you said, fiscal sponsorship and building stronger relationships with your fiscal sponsor. So how were you grappling with the need of what's going on, but also knowing that you're growing larger and becoming more formal in a sense?
y- Out of necessity, like what is it, like necessity is the mother of innovation. um you really I was burning myself out. I was in a different city sometimes every other day, until 2018. From that 2016 point to 2018. Like I was really driving everywhere and like sometimes sleeping in hotels, I needed to get grounded, right? If I needed to start building like stability and like it really if I was going to build something impactful and long term, I couldn't do it alone and needed an amazing team of folks to help to do that. And it just started, right? And the need to fundraise, right? The more staff, more people, the more folks' livelihoods were also in my responsibility. And I think that that was like a whole nother added layer of like, as we're getting those structures, and just what you in response to what you mentioned about like nonprofits feeling like they lost the missions, their mission, yeah, the money. We live in a capitalist society where someone has to be on top and someone has to be on bottom. Capitalism is based on exploitation. And it's to the philanthropic world where they're getting their money for the most part, right? Either like Wall Street because they're investing their trusts or millionaires and billionaires, and it sounds conspiratorial, but it's not in the interest of a billionaire, right? Or like the owning class of folks to have people really talking about we need a radical shift, right? Like working people need livable, sustainable wages, and like people are hoarding the wealth, like literally, like five people, I think their combined wealth is $1 trillion,
Yeah.
where literally like the bottom 90% of us, are like
Mhm.
living in such conditions, the bottom of bottom,
Yeah.
that will never get to that point of wealth. Um,
Yeah. I just saw that. I don't
just
know if you saw that article. It was like a it's like a web page on the visualization of wealth, and they start with, like, what Jeff Bezos is worth, which is, I think, 85 billion or something like that, and they, like, visualize it.
no.
Yeah, it's crazy, and but he and, like, 399 other people have access to what I think it's like a trillion or 2 trillion, something like that.
I've seen I've seen similar charts that it's like, if you were to put it like, what do we think the wealth gap is versus what it in reality is? And it's kind of like,
Yeah,
and then it's like,
I know.
sure,
Yeah,
like they wouldn't even fit into the chart if we were to put the amount of money that this very small portion of people. But all of that to say, right? It's like nonprofits are also operating within these confines and within this construct. And I've seen, so for some folks, that they're doing work based on what grants are providing. And like, I think that for me, it was important to not do that. Like if I was going to be mission driven, I needed to find different sources of grants for the organization that were going to allow for us to continue to grow, and to build out and really build relationships with like some really amazing foundation folks, like the Youth Engagement Fund, the Funders Collaborative for Youth Organizing, the Movement Voter Project. I think we were really fortunate to be in an ecosystem of folks that were really trying to support the growth of the organization rather than yet another extractive force, you know,
mhm,
that we would have to contend with.
yeah. I really like that because I feel like when we think about nonprofits in general, like, especially people with values like yours and I's, where we have a lot of importance to keep being true to who we're serving in our community and, like, really truly, wanting to make sure that, like, our values are grounded. I feel like what was my train of thought?
They don't want to fund it. No one to fund the revolution won't be funded.
Right, like, they
Know?
don't exactly, so, like, w we want to keep grounded to those values, and when it comes to, like, nonprofit, we don't want to, get influenced by, like, people who are willing to help, but under their conditions, right? Like, under their restrictions or under their, like, own agenda, and,
Yeah.
um, and so I think for a lot of people, for, like, social workers or people with these similar values get there's this disillusion with nonprofit work.
And
But I like that there's
yeah,
like how you said with capitalism, we all are part of it just because we're just by virtue of
being
being
born
born
and
exactly. And but there is a way to think about, right? It's true, yeah, nonprofits, there is a lot of work that can be done to improve the way nonprofits individually work, but as a whole, having people like you in these spaces and in this work, I think keeps the work itself grounded, if that makes sense.
yeah, it makes sense. And not just me, right? And that's the part that I've learned and why it's like there's so many different kinds of nonprofits that exist in this
Yeah.
world. Because I've seen those kind of like the multi-million dollar big,
Yeah.
mean nonprofits that are just,
Yeah.
like institutions,
Yeah.
and then also like other ones that are like really trying to make shifts, and shifting the systems and really caring about the people that are also working in it, right? And trying not to replicate the same structure. So, yeah, there's a whole spectrum. There's a whole spectrum out there of like the ways that folks operate.
Yes. All right. So let's get into the different structures. I know last time you told me a little bit about the different structures of nonprofits. So if someone wanted to, let's say, nonprofit is the way that they see themselves wanting to create change and think about creating a nonprofit. I didn't even know. You were the one who taught me this, how there was more than 501(c)(3), and maybe I didn't pay attention in school, to be honest. But I
That-
was like,
What
"What?"
during that class?
Huh?
You were sleeping in
I was
class. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think school I like school, but, uh,
Hanging out with Ruben too
yeah,
much.
like, we were like, I don't know, I guess I didn't pay attention because I didn't know, or maybe I forgot. I think I sort of blocked out some of that time at Columbia. But, okay, so can you talk about these 2? At least I know you have experience in 501(c)(3) and 501(c)(4). So can you talk a little bit about 501(c)(3)?
Okay. 501(c)(3), I believe, I don't know, you should fact check
Okay.
this, but it might be the most common.
I think it
Like,
is
it's
because that's the only one I've really heard about.
501(c)(3), and that's where folks are doing, nonpartisan work,
Okay.
work that doesn't get involved in political work within 501(c)(3s. Only like 10% of your budget tops can go towards like advocacy
Mhm.
work or like lobbying
Mm,
legislators. You can't really endorse candidates. You can't get involved in the political
okay.
systems. You
So
um
that is I
you can,
think that is the most common, right? Especially, like, community centers and things like that.
yeah, you hear them, I don't want to mess up my nonprofit status.
Yeah, yeah.
It's something that you hear a lot. Yeah, that's with 501(c)(3). And service orgs, right? There's like cultural orgs, there's like music nonprofits, arts nonprofits, that all fall under that category. And certain political ones,
Mm,
but they're talking more to like the larger systemic issue rather than any specific party or ideology or inclination.
gotcha.
So, like a lot of our issue based work with Student Power Network falls within 501(c)(3).
Okay,
Mm.
gotcha. And what about so if if you were to get a little bolder, like you said.
Okay. Also, tax
Mm,
deductible. With 501(c)(3s, those are tax deductible contributions
okay,
also to an organization. Then 501(c)(4) is where a lot of the work where, for example, when the bill was first introduced to like change the way that Black history is even taught in all of these book bans and anti-LGBTQ plus bills. We're under 501(c)(4, we were then able to name those specific bills when like the people introducing those bills and like why you're because it's more partisan work because we're definitely like clear that in Florida, the Republican governor with the Republican House and the Republican led Senate are the ones pushing down these policies that are xenophobic, homophobic, racist, against women, against people's wills, and against what they were. Now I'm in a tangent, but against people's wills and against people's bodies and their autonomy. And communities weren't even asking for these bills, but somehow they're introducing them. But all of that because with 501c4, you're able to talk more directly to those things. But even within that, there are limitations because there's a 501c4 like general operating funds that's like for you to operate generally. But then there's also like restricted 501c4 where you can only do like something specific. Then there's like unrestricted funds that you could get that would allow you to do more. So even within the larger classifications, there were still like limits on the kind of money that was available within it. So it's like C4 restricted, unrestricted, general operating. So the money all goes towards specific things. Same budgeting is a whole nother thing that I learned throughout the process of Florida Student Power Network, but that's part of it, the kind of money that we were fundraising also, and what that would allow. And I think that there's just like federal
Right.
restrictions and audits that happen to make sure that those boundaries aren't being crossed between one and the other. So if someone was doing 501c3 work, very specifically doing that set of work. If someone is doing C4 work, they had to like log the hours and the times that you're doing it so that that can come from that bucket of money, and the calculation per hour, per staff person that was doing that kind of work. I know there's like 501c5, C6. Labor unions are their own kind of 501 status. Yeah, there's like PACs, that folks form. So there's a lot of different distinctions and classifications.
Okay. So you would say to anyone who wanted to start a nonprofit with a nonprofit status to look into the right status and do research for the proper status that would be most appropriate for the work that you want to do.
Yes. What is it that you're trying to achieve and what's going to best serve your purpose?
Okay. If someone wanted to start, let's say starting a nonprofit is the that's what they want to do. And this is just maybe someone individually having their idea, having the idea of starting a nonprofit. Like where would you say they could start?
Seeing what the rules are in their state, because I know that there's like what's the application process to do it? I know there's like a state process that you have to go through, and then there's also like a federal process that you have to go to for the IRS. I would also say, does the nonprofit that you're thinking of already exist? Right? Does the idea that you're thinking about, who else is doing that kind of work and that kind of similar work? And is there already an ecosystem? Because you might not need to create it, right? Or you want to create it and there are people that you can learn from so that you're not having to recreate the wheel or do things the hard way every time. So it's who's already doing something similar that you can be learning from. And then if you know that accounting is a challenge, like getting insurance is a challenge, maybe what can be another nonprofit that could fiscally sponsor, like what you're doing, at least initially, until you're learning how to navigate the systems or build out what you need. And then budgeting, I think, would be the last piece. Really, really, really think about what is literally everything that you're spending money on in the most calculated kind of way. It's not enough to say, oh, this isn't my $1 million budget. Like maybe $10,000 for printing, maybe $100,000 for staff. You should actually really figure out if we're going to pay someone $45,000 a year, how much it does insurance for that person, workers' insurance cost, how much does the benefits, healthcare benefits cost, what is going to be like other fees that we're going to have to pay. who are consultants, really try to think about that budget in the most granular level possible. And then also where you're gonna get that money from. Like have those revenue streams and like the budget of like the money that you're spending. Streams like really try to match those things up. I think that those were lessons that I really had to come to terms with and like really get myself organized with of thinking. And I was very fortunate that my co-director, after a certain period of time at Student Power Network, like she went to business school, and like was very good at like spreadsheets and was very good at like budgeting and like really thinking about it and like a much, much more structured person than I was, She really helped
Yeah.
to really get to that level and taught me so much about that. But yeah, that's budget, who can support, and like who's already doing the kind of work, what kind of work are you trying to do? What is the process for you to get started? I would say those are like very important things.
Yeah. I really I wanted you to toot your own horn a little bit because you were the co-executive director at Student Power Network, right? And that's a big deal because then you grew it to what it was now and grew it so big that you even grew it to a point where they were able to sustain themselves. And can you say a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, no, it was hard, and I do toot my own horn, like, I think that when I think about the organization now, my co-director is now the single executive director of the organization, and she's just amazing, has, like, amazing vision, is, like, a much more is just, like, a great person, right? A great person for the role, very grounded in the communities that she's trying to work with, very grounded in the budget and like raising the money. And I always say this, I heard this from someone else said this to us one day of like every next generation is the evolution of the previous one.
Mm.
You
Mhm.
know, I'd always be like, you are the evolution of me. Everything that I've done, if I've done great things, you're gonna do greater things, and the person that's after you is gonna even do even greater things than you. And I think that I feel proud that all of those days driving around and meeting people and connecting and relationship building and like facing hardships weren't in vain. I think that they are having a real impact in the Florida ecosystems that they belong to and in the communities. And I do feel very proud about that. Right. And I think that they're doing great things.
Awesome. I know that in your work in general, you have very strong values and like very authentic to like who you are. And I know like all the people you work with in general are just amazing because,
Yeah. Yeah, not just the ED. I'm out here in these streets only giving one
yeah.
person. I think she would argue also that it's like it's the whole team, right? It's like literally everyone, and then the community that they are a part of, and the young
Yeah.
people that are around on the campuses really doing the hard work, like a recognition that it's not just one single person,
Mhm.
right? I think it really is a team effort, and leadership is like owning the responsibility
Mhm.
of moving folks in a certain direction.
Yeah.
And I think that ownership is something that really grew with time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you ever want to start another or like start your own nonprofit at some point like that's like from scratch yourself?
Possibly, if there's a need that comes up, possibly. But I think that at the point where I'm at now, I'm saying no, but very little is absolute. So I'm not going to speak in absolute terms.
I know, I know. I mean, I just ask that because You're someone that I see as, like, you're very committed to the work that you do. You stay grounded and you're very dedicated to not just the work that's needed, but also to the people around you and, like, the people that do the work with you. And so I know that if you were to ever have an idea or think about, what if we did this? What if we started this? There are people that are like 100% behind you, um, and would do
Yeah.
that with you. I would, like, if you asked me.
There are, and maybe like a for profit,
Yeah,
like again, maybe there's ways to marry,
and there
like
are.
a
Th
non-arts and a for
Mhm.
profit, that isn't exploitative, that is working in communities too. Because even then, like corporations are people,
Yeah,
apparently,
yeah,
according to the Supreme Court. But like it's like, yeah, like you were the person that spoke to me about the different corporate structures and like business structures
mhm,
that do exist and can exist. And I think that, yeah, I'd be down to start something with a group of folks, you know,
mhm,
at some point in the
yeah.
future.
If you ever do, I'm here. So,
Yeah, I'll be like, hey, Bia.
Via Boss Coaching and David Caicedo, they're collab. Well, this is our first collab here, and I really wanted to bring you on because, like I said, like I think your journey in general, as someone who has grown up to embrace these values and embrace the different work and the much needed work that we need in our communities. I've just seen that in you and then seen your work in Florida, and then you continue to come back to that. Like, that's who you are, right?
Well, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That means a
Wait,
lot.
what did you do? Oh, yeah, we're making a heart. That's for the
Oh,
listeners. Oh,
really?
and this is
Oh,
we're recording video too, so we might see it also.
oh, yeah. This is a heart with my fingers. I don't know. Yours look so much better than mine. How'd you do that?
Like that, yeah, like that. Yeah. But yeah, that's why I wanted you to come on and talk about nonprofits because I'm gonna just mention this real quick around when I was in grad school. While you were talking, it reminded me a lot about the work that I was doing across schools of social work, like community organizing around across schools of social work, because what wasn't being taught in our curriculum within, at least when I was in school, I think now it's much better, but when I was in school, systems of oppression and power and privilege, those things were not being talked about within curriculums in social work schools. And we were learning about that, and we were organizing different social work students across schools of social work in New York City to talk about that. So when you were talking about the different youths realizing different issues and problems, and then like specific issues wanting to organize around their own specific issues and problems, and then all those different things coming together to create like a huge student network, that was sort of what we were doing across schools of social work, because a lot of schools, social workers weren't wanted these conversations, and because they weren't being taught in the curriculum at the schools, they would come to our workshops and our different talks and seminars that we would have. And I think because of that, there was a lot of change. But again, like it's just the work becomes, it can get very tiring. And so you need that energy sort of like reinvigorated constantly, a lot of the time. So
Yeah, yeah.
what would you say is like a way for you to stay energized in this work?
Mm. You know, get support, ask for support. For me, as Student Net Power Network was like growing in like its structure, I was getting support too. I think that there was a program in 2018 called like Bold Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity that was like a personal transformation kind of cohort for different directors that I went through. And it was just very grounding, right? And like really helped me to get that grounding I needed, grounded in purpose, grounded in values, grounded in who am I and how do I show up in this world, given all of the systems that have manipulated our being. And how do we get to our full selves? And what is your full self? So I think that get that kind of like support that is really going to help you in a real way. And real way is like, what does that mean to you? You know what I mean? Like, if you're really, I really, there were times that I really just sat with myself of like, damn, what do I really value? I need to check myself on like the way that I'm showing up in different ways. And I think that there was just so much support, right? And I think that the times that we're in now, you hear folks talking about like resting and relaxing more, but how does that become part of the regular culture? Like instead of doing 20 things a day and like burning yourself out, how can you do 5 things just the right way when like not burn yourself out, like slowing down actually means slowing down for the sake of what's the real impact that you're trying to have when not burning yourself out and like getting those kind of supports, like getting coaches to like really help you that you can vibe with, getting like the mental health kind of support that you need, getting the rest that you need is all part of it. When you're writing in that budget item, include that resting budget or healing budget and think about healing as like a really big thing. There's like healing justice is an actual thing that folks really focus on and like think about.
Yeah, I liked what you said. I think if I were to run a nonprofit, I would have never thought to include a healing budget. That is such a great idea. And if it's doable, I say do it because it's needed and the work is always going to require that you heal, that you rest, that you take time, that you stay grounded, that you seek support. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
That you learn, right? And that you
Yeah.
learn. And growth is required.
Yeah. So healing budget, I'm gonna remember that. I think not just for nonprofit, I feel like also for businesses in general also have a do you have a line item for like rest time? Yeah.
Yeah. I think those are time off, what's paid time off, what's paid parent leave. We really have to challenge the systems and from within too, and like the way that we're creating the culture of our organizations.
I love it. I love it. If folks wanted to get in touch with you and learn more about you in general, do you want people to learn more about you? Or
Yeah, people can learn more about me.
yay.
Link in bio right here. I don't know
Link in bio in the
how
show
that
notes,
works.
in the show notes.
Link in bio right over here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can include my contact information, my email, for folks. Also, Florida Student Power is in the middle of fundraising. I think part of the ways for that sustainability is getting small donors, and like link over here.
Here,
I don't know where, but
I'll
yeah,
include the
with
link.
Florida Student Power Network, if you look at their Instagram, and on the link tree, there's a link to please consider donating to them. Also, I know that I have to become a sustaining donor,
Mhm.
and I think that those are other ways that like to gain that kind of independence to be doing the impactful work.
Awesome. Or grassroots organizing, grassroots fundraising.
Yeah, grassroots organizing, exactly. That's grassroots fundraising there. And it's like there might be a competition within like a network that they're a part of. So yeah,
Okay. So I'll
that'll also be in the bio if they want to support Florida Student Power
yes,
and their work.
Florida
More
Student
about
Power.
that.
I'm gonna include it in the show notes. I'll include your email and your contact information that you want to include, as well as Florida Student Power website and to donate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yay! Okay, anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
I just think that the moment that we're living in is requiring more of us. I think it's requiring us to really think expansively about community and how we challenge the systems around us and how do we challenge it from within. So we got to try, right? We got to try to like make the world and think about our impact. I think about what's going on in Africa a lot, especially now, like in Niger, what's going on with the Palestinian people, right? What's going on with the native Hawaiian folks and what's going on with people's
Mm,
movements. And I think that folks need to connect to organizations as much as they can that align with their values and like the issues that they feel that they're impacted by, whether it be housing, whether it be immigration, whether they care about internationalism, whether they care about hunger. We know at this point what are the root causes to these problems. And I encourage folks to really connect to organizations to really address and to start to address and to contribute to like solutions and not just false
mhm.
solutions um, to problems that we're facing.
Awesome.
So, yeah, free Palestine.
Well, thank you so much, David. I learned so much from you. I know that, there's a lot more that goes into nonprofit work, the the creation of nonprofit. I know there's a lot more that you could say. So, if folks have any follow-up questions or would like to know more, can they comment or like reach out and just ask about
Totally, 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 they can. And yeah, Black Lives Matter too,
BLM?
Oh, oh, Black lives will always matter. And we need to keep saying it, right? It's really like a call,
Yeah.
uh, to injustices,
Yes.
so, yeah.
Thank you. So, for sure, I'm gonna include everything in the show notes. I'm going to all the information as well as Florida Student Power. Yeah, I think if there's any other follow-up, just reach out to David or comment on any of the posts on social media and follow, like, there is an Instagram page for Florida Student Power, right?
Yeah, yeah, there
Yeah, I
is.
think I follow them. I've seen.
Hey,
Yes,
okay,
I know.
nice.
I'm gonna put
Yeah,
their
I can't wait for the next round. If you invite me again, like
for sure. I mean, we have so much we can talk about so many different things. So, thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge around the work that you do, and I just wanna say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
All right, everyone. That was David Caicedo, former co executive director at Florida Student Power Network, friend, colleague, and just all around badass. If you're interested in learning more about him or you'd like to get in touch, please remember to come on over to the episode show notes where you can see his contact information. You can also learn about Florida Student Power Network and you can donate to them as well. So come on over and check them out. If this episode was helpful, if it served you, if you enjoyed it, please remember to come on over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, and leave a rating or leave a review. I would really, really appreciate your support by leaving a rating or review. And you can also share this episode with a friend or a family member where other people can learn about this podcast and learn more about me as well. You can also come on over to beabosscoaching.com where you can read my blog. You can listen to other podcast episodes with the other wonderful guests that I've had so far. And you can book a call with me if you like to explore coaching. I invite you to book a call. I'd love to get to know more about you, your business, and what you'd like to achieve with coaching. There's so much that you can achieve with coaching, so I'm excited to hear more about you and your business. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been listening and giving me feedback. Y'all, the feedback that I've been getting some really good feedback on different episodes, and it's so invigorating, and I feel, I don't know how I feel. I have no words. It's amazing, and please keep your feedback coming. So I'm really excited to continue to share more stories, to continue to share my insight, what I've learned, and hopefully help all of you out there who are trying to create something and trying to stay true to your values to really do so with ease and with grace and so much authenticity. But yeah, anyway, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye.